The Ukrainians are fighting and killing the Russians for America. Is that really what's going on? Is that what we think should be going on? Now, that's a pretty potent question there, and a pretty controversial one as well. You know, the most of the popular narrative is that we're helping Ukraine to defend itself, which seems pretty plausible and reasonable on the surface of it. But there is another thought that's starting to gain some traction a little under the radar that says to the opposite, that actually Ukraine is fighting for us, that their soldiers are fighting the Russians on our behalf. And that needs to be exposed a little bit. You need to be aware of that. So we're going to do a deep dive now, because what you're going to see is this is starting to underpin American strategy, and it's turning into actions. And if that's the case, if the government's going to be going in this direction on your behalf, in your name, with your money, then you need to know about it. So first of all, just to bring you up to date so you understand what we're talking about here, there was a segment on CNN on Saturday where Colonel Layton, one of their frequent guests and military experts, was talking to the host and kind of bringing people up to date on where the war was. Here's how that segment started.
What would that mean if the United States were to just stop funding aid to Ukraine, assistance to Ukraine?
So from a military standpoint, what you're looking at, Jim, is a situation where all of the ammunition that gets to Ukraine, or at least a large portion of it, would be stopped in the pipeline at some point. They would not be getting Abrams tanks any more than what they already have. They wouldn't be getting the F-16s that they've asked for. They wouldn't be getting any of the HIMARS systems that they've gotten and that they would need to replace, some of the parts that would get worn out. So all of that would stop. And in essence, what you'd be seeing is the counteroffensive. If we think it's stalled now, it would really get stalled. And the risk would be that the Russians could then come in and mount their own counteroffensive, and the Ukrainians would have a lot less hardware to stop them with. And that is an extremely dangerous situation and would really reverse all of the gains that the Ukrainians have made so far.
Okay, just to give you a little background of what they're talking about here, this is in reference to what they thought was going to be the government shutdown that was averted. But in the deal that was negotiated for the next at least 45 days, because this is only a temporary Band-Aid to fix that issue, is that the bill passed did not include any money for the Ukraine military. So right now, there's no additional money coming in, and their concern is, well, what is the impact is that going to have on the war effort? Now, to be fair, some of the things that Colonel Layton said were accurate. That some of those things, like there won't be any additional Abrams tanks, there wouldn't be additional rounds of ammunition, and some of those other things. And that's true, there wouldn't be additional. But much of the $113 billion that's already been allocated will continue on for quite some time, and a lot of that still is in the pipeline and won't stop. So that part's not entirely accurate. But there's a much bigger issue under the surface here that's implied in here, because the mentality that he's talking about here and elucidating is common among many of the elite in Washington. And that is, we can't stop funding, for crying out loud. We have to get this fixed quickly. If they want to do a separate bill, which some are already talking about, to fund Ukraine, then they should go ahead and do with that. But it should certainly be in the full bill, the full financial bills, once those are passed, presumably in November. What you're saying is we can't stop funding Ukraine. We can't. So we are basically in a position where the leaders are telling you that we can never stop funding Ukraine. And that means that at this high level, because any diminution or any reduction or any kind of stoppage is going to be basically Ukraine's going to lose and Russia's going to win, and it's going to be your fault. Meaning, get this, make sure you understand the consequence, the situation here and what they're implying, that we have to support Ukraine forever, indefinitely, until they win the war, until they decide that they don't need any more money. This has not been passed by the Congress. This is not a situation the United States, the American people have said, yes, this is what we want to do. This is the money that we want to spend, and we're okay with this going on indefinitely. Before any of that happens, how about asking the American people? Because right now, there's no pattern, there's no anything. There's just, give them more money. No plan, no strategy, no path to get to someplace good. It's just, we can't stop. Do you get that? That's the issue. That's the message that's been sent here. We just can't stop. So just keep giving them money. Doesn't matter what's happening on the battlefield. And then you saw Colonel Layton also tying our funding to the outcome on the battlefield, that the only reason that they would lose, the Ukraine side, is because we don't give them money. Not paying any attention to any of our previous deep dives. Perhaps he should watch some of those to see that a very graphic picture is coming on, that Ukraine is losing now. They are not winning. They are losing because they don't have the manpower, and their manpower pool is dwindling by the day. And as I've told you many times, it doesn't matter how many tanks, artillery pieces, and jets we give them. They don't have the manpower to win the war on the ground, and they're already starting to fail. And you saw that there's in the last, since the beginning of the year, they have not gained any ground overall. They actually lost a little in comparison to the places where Russia has gained, despite this counteroffensive. One of the other things that Colonel Layton said was that Putin could be using this as a signal. I think that he said, yeah, it could cause Russia then to want to launch a counteroffensive if they saw we were wavering. Look, they're already going to do whatever they're going to do. They're not going to change their plans based on whether or not our funding continues on. I think actually Putin believes that that's going to happen later on anyway. I think that his plan is that he doesn't believe that the Western will is going to be going on indefinitely. So he's already thinking that. But look, the evidence suggests that they have been planning a counteroffensive for quite a long time. And the plan, at least it appears from the outside, that they wanted to weaken the Ukrainian side for their counteroffensive. And then when it's at its weakest point, then potentially launch some counteroffensives and counterattacks of their own. But that has nothing to do with the funding, because that's not going to affect anything on the battlefield for many months. So those situations are outside of that. But the most important thing is that the U.S. needs to understand our interests have to come first with our money, with our defense strategy, and with our national security. Those things have to be up front. After those are solved, then we can start to work on how we can help other people when it makes sense to do so. Unfortunately, the issue didn't stop there, and the CNN report continued on with this.
And Colonel Layton, I mean, beyond that, just the mechanics of supporting the Ukrainians and arming them as they mount this counteroffensive, I guess what kind of statement would it send to the world if the United States were to all of a sudden pull the rug out from under the Ukrainians? And what message would be received in the Kremlin by Vladimir Putin? Because it sounds like from what you're saying is that maybe Vladimir Putin might see a bit of a green light here, an opening to ramp things up and see if he could crush the Ukrainians while he maybe had a window of opportunity if the United States is starting to go wobbly.
Well, you see there. Yeah. Well, what is the message sent? Does that sound familiar to you? Because it should, because we heard that almost every year in Afghanistan. So for almost 20 years, or maybe not 20 years, but certainly from about 2008, 2009 forward, all the way to the end, when people were starting to go, does this make sense? Do we really need to spend however many 40, 60 billion at some points per year that we were sending over there? And we don't see any return. And what was the message was always the same, or the response. What message would that send to the world? That we don't have enough resolve, and that we can be outlasted and all this kind of thing. And you see that we didn't stop. For 20 years, we kept going all this money until finally Biden decided to pull the trigger. And look, as I've said many times, he took a lot of heat for how that was conducted, justly so, because there was a lot of disaster about how it was done. But he does deserve credit for taking the political heat to end in that war there. But only after 20 years, and all the administrations back to 2001 had refused to do it. And the comment was always, every time some president was thinking about withdrawing, they said, look what this would do to our credibility. It won't do anything to our credibility. Let me just point blank tell you, here's how things look from the other side of the world, especially our allies, and even more especially our adversaries. They understand that everybody has limited amounts of power, limited amounts of money, and that states will do what's going to be in their best interest. But you see, it didn't have anything to do with the outcome, because the claim that our credibility will be damaged was nonsense, because our adversaries understand that we're going to put our military power, our financial power in areas that make sense to us. And when it doesn't make sense to us, we're going to pull it back. And let there be no doubt in anyone's mind, if American national security is at risk somewhere, or if we're ever threatened by anybody or attacked by anybody, nobody on the planet has any doubts that we will bring the full force of our military to bear. stopping something that doesn't make sense, ending a war that's not in our national interest is not going to make us look weak to our potential adversaries. They already know we're strong, but they also recognize that we're not going to be stupid for too long, and we're going to continue to do what makes sense. And if we're threatened, they know that we will come all guns a-blazing. Nobody's in confusion outside of the United States on this. No one inside should be confused either. Now, one last thing on this segment I want to show, because it's the last thing he talks about, and maybe one of the more important parts of this whole segment, and that was this.
And as far as the signal to the rest of the world is concerned, what you'd be dealing with there is also a signal of weakness, lack of resolve on the part of the United States. You have to supply the people that are doing your fighting for you. And in this particular case, the Ukrainians are definitely doing the fighting for us.
The Ukrainians are definitely fighting for us. Really? So at what point did the American people say, we want to go to war with Russia, we just don't want to do the bloody part, but we need somebody else to do our killing for us? Hey, Ukraine, how about you? Because you are definitely fighting Russians and killing Russians for us. No, we are not at war with Russia. We should not be at war with Russia. We have nothing to gain from any war with Russia. That is an issue between the two bordering states, Russia and Ukraine, and we have made it our business to add into it. But our security is not at stake. And there's a number of our deep dives previously that show exactly why our security is not at stake here. Vladimir Putin does not have anywhere near the force structure or the capacity, the physical ability to threaten NATO, much less the United States, other than with nuclear weapons. And that is a very real situation, but this has nothing to do with that. In fact, this particular war keeps the risk of that nuclear exchange higher than it should be. If we get this war over with, that risk goes back to a nominal level, which is where it should be, and it should never happen. But the idea that point blank stated that they are killing Russians for us is morally reprehensible. It's inaccurate, and it's not true. Ukraine is fighting Russia for Ukraine. Ukraine is dying for Ukraine, not for the West, not for NATO, not for the United States. We need to be crystal clear on that, because if we buy into that mentality, then yeah, we have to keep fighting forever. And of course, Ukraine still can't accomplish the tactical goal, the military goal of defeating Russia. So even that would be a foolish use of our resources, but it's not going to happen anyway. But that's not something that we need to be doing. Ukraine is not fighting for America. This war is between Russia and Ukraine, and it's in our security interest, and ultimately even in the unconquered parts of Ukraine's interest, to get this war wrapped up as soon as possible. And that is your deep dive for today. Look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks a lot.